if you are a committee of one, then this video is definitely for you. But also, if you are a committee of like double digits, anything double digits, then this video is also for you as well, because I'm going to be talking about why 7 is the perfect number for ERG committees. I've been wanting to do this video for a while because I'm seeing some madness out there. So this is the video for today. I'm going to be going into the science of why 7 is the perfect number. And I don't mean just from like a sort of spiritual or woo-woo sense. I mean the real science of groups and how groups work most effectively. So this is ERG Strategy, the channel that gives you tips, tools, advice, resources, when I remember to put the links in the description, to help you run effective, engaged employee networks that actually make a difference. So if that's what you're here for, you are in the right place. Let me just move this camera up ever so slightly. Welcome. Yeah, we're talking about committees and specifically committee size. So I said last week, last week I talked about roles, and I said this week I was going to talk about committee size. So that's what we are talking about, whether you've got too few or too many. So here's the thing. I remember like going back quite a few years actually talking to some network leads who I certainly would consider award winning, and actually they did win some awards. And when I spoke to them about their committee, and I wasn't even really thinking about size at the time because this was before we'd done our survey, and I must remember to talk about the survey results. But when I talked to them about how they got their committees working well and effectively, and I'm thinking of two particular ERG leaders who shall remain nameless, but the one basically said that one of the things that she did was that if somebody had an idea, if somebody on the committee had an idea, or actually just somebody in the network, a network member had an idea, she would say to them, all right then, lead it. Right. So that's one way of kind of just, getting people to actually take action and do some of the work, because we know when you don't have an effective committee, all of the work falls onto you as co-chair, right? So that was the one thing. She used to sort of just say, look, whoever comes up with an idea, they can then lead it, right? So that was the one. And then the other one I'll never forget as well, when I had a conversation with her about the committee, the way that she said she got it to work is making sure that everybody in the committee had an action, had a doing role, had a project or an initiative that they were leading on. And this is something I talked about last week, about the importance of roles that are aligned to the priorities of the things that you want to deliver that year, right? Rather than just being generic roles like an events role or a comms role. So those are two examples of, for me, what good looks like in terms of committees that are active. So when it comes to, I'm going to get into some of the science, but I want to start first of all with the survey that we did. So there's not a lot of research out there on employee resource groups. There's a little bit more now. But because I was so frustrated at the lack of research, we have actually been doing some research over the past couple of years. And, if you've been involved in my work, you'll have seen us putting surveys out. So when we asked about the typical size for committees, we were given a number of 6 to 10. So most organisations have ERGs with committees of a size 6 to 10. Now, interestingly, the other thing I would say from that same survey, and this was like end of 2024 is when we did the survey. The other thing that people said, when we asked them to name one thing that was most important to the success of an ERG, they mentioned having a strong committee, right? So for me, these things go together. You've got to have a strong committee, and the number I think actually is quite important. So I've talked there about examples of what good looks like, committee members that actually roll their sleeves up and do all of the work rather than just coming to meetings to have a chit chat and kind of then watching you as the co-chair kind of, break your back trying to do your big day job and also lead the network, right? So I'm going to start with some of the science, right? And I've got to have some notes here because this, I want to bring a lot of science to this, right? It's the accountant in me. So the first one is going back to like the 1880s, right? Maximilian Ringelmann ran a series of experiments, but out of that came a term which was like social loafers, basically. And this was off the back of, I think that this is the story of like the, what's that thing? Tug of war with a rope, right? And basically, he set up this experiment where it was tug of war, and it was either with like one person pulling a rope or like a number of people on each side, and like then varying the numbers of people. Basically, which you can imagine, right? Tug of war, right? I don't know if you remember tug of war, if you used to play it in the school or whatever, right? But basically, the bigger the numbers got, the less effort people were making, right? So just think about that. The bigger the numbers got, the less effort people were making. So those of you out there with your big committees, I'm looking at you, right? So here's the thing. When you have more people, everybody starts to look around and assume that somebody else is going to do the work. And this is exactly what Maximilian Ringelmann, great name, was talking about in his experiment. And actually, I think there was a number that he came up with. I think it was 15 plus was the magic number that he said, efficiency actually started to go down. Effort started to go down after a certain number. I'll have to see if I can dig out a link and put it in the comments. But yeah, basically social loafing. Too many people leads to not enough action because everybody thinks that somebody else is going to do the work. So that's why we do not want big numbers. But I want to come on to, so if you have got a big number at the moment, what does it look like? So I want to go on to, there's another piece of research by somebody called Robin Dunbar, and they were talking about social groupings of people, and they were also talking about trust and accountability and where it started to fall apart. But they did talk about the dynamic of when you have a very big group, and they talked about something called a sympathy group, which actually I think this is what we sometimes see with large ERG committees. It's basically, it's tea and sympathy, right? So if you're watching this from a part of the world where that isn't a common saying, you know that tea is a very sort of British thing. Is it English? Maybe it's even more of an English thing, right? So tea and sympathy is kind of like literally just a meeting where you come together to drink tea and sympathize with each other. And literally he said that this number 15 is often the number where it's actually more of a sympathy group rather than a group that has trust and accountability. And he actually put the number at more like 3 to 5 people, so actually less than the 7. He said that actually the best group in terms of forming trust and accountability was 3 to 5 people. Now, what that reminded me of, actually, it reminded me of a couple of committees that I'm aware of where it's probably just like a couple of co-chairs and maybe a comms person, or a couple of co-chairs and events person, and they're doing all of the work. And actually, for so few people, they're achieving a lot. And that's probably because there is that trust between them. One will pick up the reins when the other's not there. I think I had a LinkedIn Live on Friday, actually, where the co-chair was singing the praises of their fellow co-chair and said, when I'm going to be off, they then pick up the reins. When they're busy at work, I then pick up the reins, etc. That can be easier to do when you're a smaller number. So there is something actually about these very small, very effective teams of people. I went to an event recently in London. I was on a panel for the Black professionals in life sciences, and they were talking about the team of organisers. And when the team of organisers stood up, it was so small given how large the event was and given that they all have day jobs, right? So there is something about very small, effective committees. So again, don't be tempted to have more people than you need. More does not equal more output, right? It just means kind of like more people talking probably at the meeting. And, you really don't want it to be a sympathy group. If you do need, so let me caveat that. If you are in a stage of your network growth where there is maybe a lot going on in terms of what I would call the wrong behaviours or the wrong type of culture, maybe it's a toxic workplace, and actually you're in sort of those early forming stages, things are quite organic, and actually maybe a lot of your meetings are talking about the challenges, the issues. Do you know what I would recommend? I would recommend that you split that off and maybe have some listening sessions or some focus groups that are specifically around some of those workplace issues. And actually the committee maybe just breaks off and starts to actually change the dynamic from being like a kind of general, sort of sharing session. I don't want to say moaning session, but a BMW session, sort of sharing, moaning session. You want to change it from that. So the committee can maybe, allow that to happen in like some listening circles or focus groups. And the committee then can start on the work of, right, what have we got in terms of data? How do we get more support from our exec sponsor? Who do we need to work with in the people team? Actually, what is the data around the things that are being talked about, whether it's bullying and harassment data or something else, right? So that's what I would say you need to do. If the committee is just a large number of people and it's descending into this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, okay? That's my advice on that front. And then the last piece of research that I've got for you comes out of Harvard, and it's a little bit timely because we've recently had the space shuttle landing. So this Harvard researcher, J. Richard Hackman, actually spent decades studying real teams, including NASA crews. I mean, look at how small that crew was that's just gone past the moon, right? The crew that was actually on the spaceship. I know it took an army of people, right, on the ground, but look at that tight knit crew, right, that were in the actual spaceship. Is it a spaceship? Is it rocket? I don't know. Anyway, so J. Richard Hackman spent decades studying teams, NASA crews, and also hospital units as well. And he talked about the cost of coordination when the group gets too big. And there's actually a formula for it. I'm not going to go into the formula. Maybe if I have time, I'll put it in the description. But the formula, for anybody that's interested, if you're a bit of a maths nerd, I did maths A-level. I do actually love maths. The formula is, in terms of the coordination efforts, I think the formula, or the links maybe, it's N times, so open brackets, N minus 1, close brackets, divided by 2. You can tell I love my maths. I love a formula. And that gives you the number of communication links that the group has to manage, right? The number of communication links and the coordination. So a committee of 7 has got 21 links to manage. A committee of 12 has got 66, right? Which is huge. So it's basically saying the more people you have in the committee, the cost of like coordinating all of the bits of communication and things that are happening just starts to spiral. And bearing in mind, everybody's doing this on top of their day job, right? Nobody's got time to manage this big unwieldy thing. So actually, that's why the committee number being smaller is right. Now, what I want to say is, I'm not basically saying that, you have to have these 7 people and they have to do all of the work. Because I do want to shout out what I've seen done really well in very large and very complex organisations where, for example, there are lots of stakeholders. The committee is kept quite small, but sometimes chapters are set up. So there are committees that look after a chapter or a region or a location, which is fine. So that's one way of doing it. And again, I would say within those chapter structures, again, keep them small. So for the people that are actually doing the work, the committee doing the organising, keep that small. Another format that I love is where you basically have like working groups or work streams that then work on a specific priority that's come out of the committee. So again, that's another way. But again, I would say keep those working groups small again, right? A name that I heard recently for the working groups is squads, which I quite like. It's kind of cool. So that's one way that you can get beyond the whole like, okay, is it just these 7 people that have to do all of the work? No, but it's kind of the 7 people that are responsible and communicate with each other to make sure that the work gets done, right? So what do you do if you've got people beyond that maybe want to get involved, right? So you don't want to just sort of say to them, oh, sorry, the committee's full, you can't get involved. There are other things that they can do, right? If you were to listen to my video about engagement on Viva Engage, there are specific roles that you can give to people to kind of help to keep the Viva Engage platform alive and thriving and engaging. And that's perfect, right, for individuals that, that you don't pull into the committee. As I said, there are also these other initiatives that are happening that you can get other people involved in. Also, in terms of an organisation that has different regions or operational areas or particularly if you have frontline colleagues that aren't desk-based, and there is this challenge of how you connect into those teams. You know, use your wider group of members to kind of be those champions that either maybe they go and do a couple of site visits and are kind of like the ambassadors, you know, for the network, and they take like a pull-up banner or something, you know, and they talk to people about the benefits of being a part of the network, right? So there are all kinds of ways that you can use other people that aren't necessarily sat on the committee, because the committee is about decision making and prioritizing, right? So you don't need everybody on that. You just need a handful of people, and that's it. So 7, that is why 7 is the magic number. It's not only a lucky number, it's the magic number for your committee. What sometimes comes with that, though, when I tell people that their committees are too big, I can tell by the look on their face, they're kind of thinking, oh, I've got to have some difficult discussions, right? What does that look like, the difficult discussions? Maybe I need to do a video about difficult discussions, like, for example, when you've got a co-chair that needs to step down, or somebody that's in a role and it's not working out. I don't know, maybe. If you want to see those sorts of videos, let me know and I'll see what I can do. Thank you so much for listening. If this was useful, share it with your committee members. If your committee is too big, share it with your co-chair, share it with your D&I team or with your exec sponsor. But I hope it has given you some inspiration. Again, if you want to know about the roles, so the roles that I talked about, you can check that out in last week's video. All right, guys, hope this was useful. Please do give it a thumbs up, subscribe, share it with somebody else that needs to hear it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.